Prospect House Media.
And now, prepare yourself for the only weekly podcast you won't want to miss. Welcome to the Ameritocracy Show with Troy Edgar, live from our studios in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C.
Hey everybody, I am Troy Edgar and welcome to the Ameritocracy Show. Thank you for tuning in and checking it out. It is greatly appreciated. This podcast examines the conditions for personal and economic growth and opportunity across America. This week, I meet with Laura Herzog, CEO of the nonprofit Honoring Our Fallen, in our LA studio. Laura works tirelessly coordinating with the military casualty officers on hero missions to ensure that the military heroes are given the respect and recognition they deserve upon their final return home. Laura's commitment does not end there. She and her organization continue to provide resources, comfort, and support to the families of the fallen in the coming years that follow their loss. As she says, a hero remembered never dies. Laura discusses her calling, the challenges of grief, and the impact that remembrance has for the families of those who have sacrificed the most in the protection of our country. I hope you will join me in attending or supporting the Golden Boot Awards Gala being held on Saturday, September 16th in Seal Beach, California. For more information or to purchase tickets, please go to honoringourfallen.org. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy. Hey, Laura, how you doing?
I am so good. I'm so good. It's so good to see you.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming out and doing this today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate being able to tell our story.
Yeah, Honoring Our Fallen as an organization, you've done such a great job. And, the history that we have together to be able to see this really start from nothing to growing to a national organization, and the work that you do is so honorable. But I thought what might be helpful, if you wouldn't mind, just lay out a little bit how you and I connected in the beginning, and we'll kind of get into our story here.
Yeah, well, I remember meeting you when I was the general manager for the News Enterprise newspaper in Los Alamitos, and whether it was bumping into you at a Relay for Life event or a Costa Youth Shelter event or something, that was happening at in the community, we would cross paths. And so when I was offered the job to be the community relations public affairs officer at the base, then it was a really easy transition for me, especially with a lot of you locals, because we weren't strangers.
Yeah, and the base, Joint Forces Training Base Los Alamitos, a base that services all of the military services, and a lot of activity happens. And so in Southern California, also the base where has a major runway, and CalFEMA, it has Marine detachments, Army, everything out there. So, and the Sunburst Academy, which we'll talk about for kids too. Yeah, so what I thought what would be helpful to just to kind of introduce you to the listeners, if you wouldn't mind just giving a little bit of an idea of your background and kind of up to the point where we met.
Yeah, so I'm 51 years old. I was born and raised in the state of California. I was born before there were hospitals up in the mountain areas up near Wrightwood, and so my parents had to drive down the hill 45 minutes to San Bernardino. So I was born out there. But I grew up the first 7-8 years of my life up in the mountains in a small little mountain community. And then my parents moved down to Seal Beach, and I've pretty much been in the Orange County area for the remaining of my life here. I did start working for the News Enterprise newspaper in Los Alamitos, and that's actually we interjected that a few minutes ago, but that's how we first met. Mm-hmm. I was a young mom. I had been remarried, and so I had a kid, and I found a job there at the newspaper, and I've always had a passion for reporting and more on the feel-good stories side of the house. So I'm excited to be able to tell you how God worked to make what we are today here. So anyway, so you and I met there through the News Enterprise, and then through the News Enterprise, I was able to accept a position that was offered to me by the commanding general at the base at the time. I worked a lot because it's a community base, like you had mentioned. So you're right. I mean, with all the events there and with the runway there and the Sunburst Youth Academy there and a lot of community events, the 4th of July and different things that happen there, we would cross paths there. I was representing the newspaper and stuff. And so through that, the general offered me a job to come to work for him, and I did.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, at that base, it has probably 5 or 6 surrounding cities. And so your job too was dealing with all of the mayors and city council, the county supervisors, and the Congress folks that would be coming through to be parts. Some of the on the positive side too, change of commands. There's always a big change of commands there. The head of the National Guard, Dave Baldwin, would come down, and we would have opportunities to see what was going on in Sacramento. So it was a really special thing for the city, really special thing for this region. And it was nice to have someone on the inside that really kind of looked out, for the local community to make sure that the community kind of stayed behind the base.
Right. And that's what my job at the base was, every general that I worked for when I worked at that base. And I know he's retired now, I believe, Major General Baldwin. I mean, all the way up to Sacramento, the whole time that I was there at the base, it was about the base doing what the base needed to do, the community having the communication with knowing what was going on at the base. But the base worked really hard and still does to this day. The Joint Forces Training, my backyard looks out at the airfield. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you that the base still to this day, long after my leaving, still works to create a positive, good working relationship with the communities that surround the base. And like you said, Cypress, Los Alamitos, Seal Beach, there's many cities. Mm-hmm. But from my time there as the public affairs officer, and then still to this day, the base is a good place, and the base wants to support the community, and the members that have signed that blank check that serve at that base want to do what they do for us.
Yeah, no, I agree. And Laura, when we were there, I think what probably cemented the relationship that you and I had, because I think when you're in local government, you meet a ton of people at all different levels. And so, some of them, you want to have long-term relationships with all of them, but a lot of it is transactional. And, what I think was a solidifying event for you and I was when you were at the base, we were starting to get a lot of honor missions that would come through the base. And just for the listeners' perspective, because, we'll get to what we're here to talk about, but can you just inform our listeners what an honor mission is for people that may not have had to encounter this?
So we call it a hero mission. Some will call it an angel flight. The official term for the military is a dignified transfer of remains. We call it a hero mission, and what it is when an active duty service member passes away, their human remains are brought to an airport, the closest airport to the receiving funeral home. And there's a lot of layers underneath that in regards to whether the service member was in combat, not in combat, and that kind of thing. But nevertheless, the bottom line is the hero mission is the dignified transfer of remains. And
again, just to kind of maybe give the magnitude of the effect it has when you're there, is that one of your jobs was you would get everybody to come to the base and these were usually in the middle of the day. And some of us are corporate people too, trying to work, but it was always important. Everybody would get there, they would assemble, and we would kind of wait for the flights to come in. And then you would kind of prepare a lot of the activities that would be really to, first and foremost, honor the family that's about ready to have a very traumatic time, but to have the community out there to support. And you did such a good job.
So thank you. So I want to, so just back for clarification, because honoring our fallen now serves the dignified transfer and arrival for all active duty military. When you and I first met, the only fallen service members that came in to the Joint Forces Training Base Los Alamitos were ones that had been killed in combat. And they came in on a private aircraft, Kalita Air, that is stationed and housed out of Dover Air Force Base, Dover, Delaware. The only transfer of remains that come on Kalita Air are combat death. So you and I, when I worked at the base, I didn't serve all the arrivals, even for the combat death, unless they came into our base. And the reason and what my role and responsibility initially, and I know we're going to get into more of,
Your
okay,
organization.
then what happens? What are you doing now? 10 years, 13 years later. So initially, my only role and responsibility in the hero mission was if there was going to be a hero mission that took place at the Joint Forces Training Base Los Alamitos. Right. And then my role and responsibility was not even as the casualty officer. My role and responsibility was, because I was the public affairs officer at the base, if we're going to have media, congressional representatives, local city elected officials, and people on the base to honor this fallen hero and this family, then that was my role and my responsibility. And that is where I believe that God showed me my calling.
Yeah. And I could see it then is you definitely were able to wrangle us and lead the community leaders through the process, because it, we're walking into a situation that is very heavy. And we're not full-time politicians either, so it's a little awkward. And it was always nice to have somebody that was a little bit more conditioned for that type of thing, because we also, first and foremost, we wanted to represent our city well, and we wanted to make sure that family felt there was a tremendous amount of respect for what had happened.
Well, and that's a perfect time for me to thank you. Thank you. And thank all the local electeds that I worked with back 13 years ago, because it wasn't hard for me. It wasn't hard for me because I have tears in my eyes saying that. I knew you guys personally because I met you at a change of command, or I met you before I worked at the base when I managed the newspaper. I knew the individual. So whether you were the chief of police, you were the mayor, you were a local representative, I knew, and that's what I loved about the way that it worked, is I knew our community leaders, whether it be Cypress, Seal Beach, Los Alamitos, and I knew that I could tell the families, because they were strangers to me too. Mm-hmm. Okay, but now I'm the public affairs officer at the base. We're getting ready to bring their loved ones' remains into this base, and they're going to allow the local community and the local elected officials to come in and to render condolences. And I knew that it was going to be okay, and that you guys were coming there with a genuine heart to come and to render condolences and pay respects.
Yeah. After that time period, and like I said, that was the thing that at least for me personally, really kind of, solidified, I think, kind of special times. And it wasn't just once as many. But I think you and I, after, elected office, we kind of drifted apart, but I did see that there was something there with you. And what I'd like to do is start to transition a little bit to take us from that point now, the foundation. You are really good at this. It's folks that have died in combat specifically. It's specifically for Los Al. And then I kind of lost track of you, and then all of a sudden you're back on my radar with honoring our fallen, and it's really like in full speed ahead. And so could you kind of fill in the blanks between where we left off and setting up your organization?
Yeah, and I appreciate you giving me the honor and privilege to be here today and to help tell my story, because people may see the logo on the side of one of our vehicles driving down the freeway. Just yesterday, we had the remains of a Marine Corps veteran that was on a humanitarian effort serving over in Ukraine, trying to help train the Ukrainian military. And he was blown up by a missile. And he came in yesterday, and I remember driving down the freeway, and I look up, and there's a Fox 11 helicopter over my head. So if somebody saw that on the news and said, what is that organization? What do they do? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to kind of just wrap it back. There is a little bit about what we talked about before, but my life was forever changed on the 10th of November, 2009. And the 10th of November, 2009, I was sitting in my office at the base, and I was working on some veterans presentations for the general for Veterans Day, and the First Sergeant Marines, like you mentioned earlier in our talk, the Joint Forces Training Base, that is a base that actually was owned by the Navy as a part of the Naval Air Station. In the 1990s, I believe it was 1995, the base was sold by the Navy to the United States Army Corps of Engineering, and it is currently leased and managed by the California National Guard. But it does have tenants on that base, and I know you mentioned a few of them, the Marine Corps, who has since moved, but at that time they were there, and then there's the Sunburst Youth Academy, there's the Army Reserve component, and so forth. And it was my responsibility to know all that as the PAO, so it all just like stuck in my head. But So I was working on, and the Marines were there on the base, and all that in background information is important, especially to your listeners, Troy, those that are wondering, like, how did this start? Why is it here? Like that kind of thing. And that's what you asked. So the first sergeant says, we've got to go in 10 minutes. And I thought, oh, great. It's the Marine Corps birthday. I don't want to go take some more pictures of cake cutting. Those guys like to cut cake all day on their birthday. I can still smell the roses that were at the front door. I can still feel it was an out-of-body experience. 10th of November, 2009, Lance Corporal Justin Swanson, 21 years old from Anaheim, California, had been blown up by an IED. And I can say that I, even as a public affairs officer at the base, like we've been talking about, even though I had experiences with you with change of commands and this and this and this, I took my freedom for granted, Troy, until that day. And I sat in that living room on the 10th of November, 2009, thinking, Christmas is coming, this is coming, and here's this mom and her son's dead and never coming home. Does that mean that I did not have respect for other service members that died before him? No, absolutely not. But the impact of it, the depth of it, didn't resonate with me until that day when I was sitting in that living room. And I thought, whoa. So why do I say that? And why did I, in our time speaking it with your, question, why did I give that question so much depth or meat in this conversation is because God used the flame of Lance Corporal Justin Swanson, 21 years old from Anaheim, California, United States Marine Corps, and his sacrifice, this stranger that I never knew, to light the flame that has now become Honoring Our Fallen, which is why you and I are sitting here today.
Wow. Yeah. Tell me what first of all, I just got to absorb that. That's pretty powerful. So talk to me a little bit. We've had a couple other nonprofit CEOs that have come on that their inspiration story definitely gave them the fuel or the flame, as you put. But talk about setting up this organization to kind of get it up and off the ground.
So I was inspired. So like I said, my life was forever changed on the 10th of November, 2009. My contract at the base didn't end until the 28th of January, 2011. So I believe that 10th of November, 2009 was the seed that God was planting to show me that he was going to show me my calling for my life. I left the job at the News Enterprise thinking that the job at the base was going to be a permanent position. So I was rather surprised when the general couldn't, and he was, there was no lack of information. So the general said, this is a temporary position. It's a 2-year contract. I'm trying to make this a permanent position here at this base. So, and I still know to this day that he tried all the way up to the end. Now, near the 28th of January, 2011 is when the federal drawdown started. And my position that I was in, that was a federally contracted position, was one of 106 positions within the state of California that were no longer funded. So it wasn't, they didn't pick my contract. I mean, they had we don't have money anymore and the withdrawal is happening. So we're going to, we've got to get rid of some positions that we don't need, and we're going to kind of overlap them, which is the perfect lead in to what I knew that I needed to do. And I know it's not about the withdrawal or anything like that, but what I saw through doing this is that my job was handed to somebody else that had another job. So now they got one more tasker on their desk. And what I saw with these casualty missions is these casualty officers that are assigned to the families, they have a full-time job within the military, full-time job with the Navy, full-time job with the Marine Corps, full-time job with the Air Force, the Marine Corps, all of that. They have a full-time job and a responsibility. And then they have a temporary assignment to be a casualty officer for a family who has lost an active duty service member. So I believed and still believe to this day at that time that it was my calling to start honoring our fallen so that we could work alongside these casualty officers and do logistical work, do coordinations, give them a direct phone number at an airport or a direct phone number that they may need. Whether the family wanted the third-party support or not, we could still help them on the backside. Mm-hmm. So I went to my husband and with his blessing, decided to start honoring our fallen. For the first 7.5 years, I didn't collect a salary, Troy. Mm. So it goes back to kind of your lead in when you were talking about money. I dove in feet first, no money, no salary, no donations, started the organization. It was actually a member of the American Legion here locally, who's now actually the commander of the Seal Beach Post, that saw a story in the News Enterprise and called me, and she and her husband actually paid the $1,008 to get our nonprofit filing done. Mm-hmm. So we got all of our nonprofit filing and everything done and dove forward into serving. And at that point, it was just a matter of personal service. So we didn't need hundreds and thousands of dollars from people donating because we were donating our time. Now, I was able to donate my time because I didn't need the salary. My husband was able to take care of our household. Mm-hmm. I do collect a salary now, and we do have, obviously we've grown in 13 years.
It's an organization.
But, right, exactly. But how it started was, let's go figure out how we can make a difference. Mm-hmm. Let's go make a difference in the lives of these casualty officers. And by doing that and helping them, then we are in turn helping the family.
When you get ready to set up the programs that you're going to offer, there's a host of different places where you could fit into this. The good news is, if you're going to start any business, it's good to kind of have an understanding of where the holes are, and especially I'll call it uncontested space, where you're not fighting it out with a bunch of other folks that think that would be the greatest space to be. And nonprofits, it's that on steroids because, it's limited resources and a lot of people that come into it with their heart. But they don't have the funds, and they've got to try to kind of get the story out there. What are the programs for honoring our fallen that you would, if you kind of had to break it, your organization into one or two areas of focus?
So if you go to honoringourfallen.org and you go to the donation button and you get there, and during the process of making that donation, it gives you an option of what program you would like your donation to fund. So we do have the hero missions, first and foremost, which is what the majority of our time that we've been chatting today have been about. And then we do have retreats and gatherings where we bring families together, families that, but we don't just serve the military, Troy, and I think that this is a perfect time to say something that I forgot to mention. So we do also serve law enforcement and first responders as well when we're called upon to do so. And so what does that mean? And why did I bring it up now? What it means is those retreats and those gatherings where families of the fallen, surviving families, whether it be mom, dad, wife, husband, a child, grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle, they're all welcome. And our retreats and our gatherings are available to all surviving families of active duty military and active duty first responders. And then we have our random acts of love. And so those are really where we just want, because once the funeral's done, Troy, you've lost family members, so they don't have to be military. Every listener that is listening to this right now has lost someone in their life.
Right.
And they know that once the funeral was done, so all those people that were knocking at the door, bringing food, doing this, the funeral's done, the burial's done, and everybody, boom, vanishes. Mm-hmm. So the mindset behind the random acts of love is that they know that they're not alone and we don't forget. And it's also the mindset behind the retreats and the gatherings so that they can remember and they can gather one more phone number. That's always my goal on the retreats and the gatherings and I look across the table and I smile and my heart beams with joy when I see that widow or the mom or the sisters or even the dads and the brothers getting that phone number of somebody else that lost their loved one, because when their day gets dark, they've got another number in the phone of someone else who understands.
Yeah, I know one of the themes of your organization is a hero remembered, never dies, and so that mindset, and I think you've nailed it. At anybody that's lost anybody, a good parallel to kind of give an idea. Can you talk a little bit about here locally, a couple of things that I've seen is the Honoring Our Fallen wall in Long Beach, and how that fits into your organization or the parameters of what that stands for. Now that you've opened up, the scope is actually also with public safety law officers and military.
Yeah, so a hero remembered never dies. And I can't give the right accolades to the quote, but I've heard that we die twice. You and I are going to die twice. Mm-hmm. Okay? You and I, Troy, are going to die the day we die, and then we're going to die again the moment that someone stops saying our name. And so the idea behind the memorial wall in Long Beach kind of goes back, and, I had, some families you'll see, even family members of those that died in combat, some grieve publicly, some grieve privately. And but whether they grieve publicly or whether they grieve privately, at the end of the day, they both want the sacrifice of their loved one, whether it be in combat or not in combat. They want the sacrifice, the name of the person that signed the blank check to defend your and my and every listener on this show's freedom. They want their loved one remembered. So how do we do that? So unfortunately for some, the wall does not include, and there probably isn't there isn't a wall big enough in the world, I don't think, to list all of those that we've lost to Vietnam. What do I mean by that, Troy? Is their loved one died of Agent Orange 40 years after serving in Vietnam. So they got the Agent Orange from serving in combat, but it wasn't an active combat death in Vietnam. Same thing with our current conflicts. Our past, Iraq and Afghanistan. So why do I bring all that up? We petitioned the city of Long Beach, and we were granted a right of entry to a park in Long Beach, and we were able to place marble slabs on a wall. Mm-hmm. Marble slabs on the wall list the names of every fallen service member that has died in combat as reported by the Department of Defense since 9/11. So unfortunately, those that have passed due to PTSD and the other evils of this conflict and this war and all of that, whether it be self-inflicted or not, we were not and do not have the ability to list that our wall isn't big enough. So anyway, and so we have a wall in Long Beach. It has the names of all those that have died in combat since 9/11. And that, to circle it back to your question about a hero remembered never dies, it's my hope. And I love on Memorial Day. So we go out on every Memorial Day to the wall, Troy. Mm-hmm. We go out there every year, and we have Marines and soldiers and families and even family members that their loved one died of suicide. They still come out to the wall, and they still gather with us at Memorial Day because they know who we are and what we do. So, but my whole point is I love it when I go out there, and I could show you some pictures, but I love it when I see this husband and this wife, or sometimes it's just a lady and kids or a dad and kids, but it's the kids. Cause remember I kept saying kids.
Yep.
Is because our freedom is only one generation away from extinction. And so the minute that we quit teaching our kids the fact that there are sacrifices of those that have gone before us, whether it be World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Desert Shield. So we are working to erect plates on that wall now, and I should know late August that we will have a plate that honors all of those. World War I, World War II, Korea. So it won't have their names, but it will be a plate there on that wall, because those men and women whose names are on that wall that have died in Iraq and Afghanistan, they served and they know the sacrifices of the brothers that went before them.
Right.
So we will do that. And then we will also have a special plate of those that have lost the invisible battles and the ones not spoken of, self-inflicted PTSD.
Yeah, it's interesting, Laura. So I'm a runner, and I live in DC, and my daily run is through the National Mall and right by the Vietnam Memorial Wall. And during the weekends, I'll go a little bit later because I'm usually not before work. But I see exactly what you're talking about. I think sometimes, I'll be out there and I'll stop and I'll talk to people, and they're just so proud to show their son or their brother's name on that wall, like that identification. And, being a veteran, and I look at that and it's like you said, freedom's not free.
No.
And, those types of memorials, that type of activity, the type of work that you're doing, I think it's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show is I just think it's super important to, get into the mindset of what it takes, to kind of help support families that are going through that. The other part is just to remember, and to make sure that we are remembering. Something that, as we kind of get near the closing of this, that, kind of in that vein of remembering and you, as you were talking about your story, November 10th, and you're in the living room, you're smelling the roses, a tremendous amount of grief, you go through that. And, the hard part is for you, I would think is, people that aren't around that type of a situation may have a family member pass a year ago, and maybe someone before that 8 years ago, or maybe you have a really good spell and it's been a while. But I think going through your job every day, you wake up and you're either getting ready to engage in something, you're in the middle of one, or you've just tried to put it behind you as a process. But going back to your theme is you can't forget, because it's all about, we're trying to get them to remember. So you're kind of locked into these three phases of responsibility in your organization. And so my question to you has to do with grief, and how do you deal with, I know you as a very strong woman, like super strong. Like I gotta watch out because I'm. You when you're a reporter, you're a little tough on me. But I know. But when you look at dealing with grief on a day-to-day basis, it's I don't know. I'm fascinated. I'd like to know, like, how do you compartmentalize this? And every day I see you, you have this huge smile, a really bright smile that lights up the room. But inside, I'm sure it's a tough deal.
It is. And it's funny that you ask that and that you say that. I started honoring our fallen 13 years ago, and there is not a day that goes by in my life that I am not asked at least one time by someone, how do you do what you do? Mm-hmm. If it means that I've parked my truck at Vaughn's and I'm going grocery shopping, okay? Mm-hmm. I'm going into the grocery store. Someone sees me pull up in the truck. They see the logo and they say, how do you do what you do? Mm-hmm. Or so, and you say that I'm so strong. And I'm going to bring it back to God. I don't, Troy, you and I have known each other a really long time, and I've never really talked to you about what your faith is. But I can tell you what my faith is. And my faith is in Jesus. And God showed me, because I was really angry when the position at the base wasn't made permanent. But little did I know it wasn't supposed to be made permanent. We all have a calling. So whoever's listening to this podcast, it's my hope. I don't know whether you're supposed to serve veterans, you're supposed to serve, your community in some way, shape, or form, but we're all called to serve. We're all called to serve somehow, some way. And so it does answer your question of how do I deal with my grief. So when God calls you, he provides for you. So that doesn't, people could read that and people think, oh, they're just talking about money. No, I'm not. I'm talking about the strength. I'm talking about, I'm like tired or whatever. And I'm like, how am I still awake? Right? I don't do drugs. I haven't drank coffee. I drank some iced tea, but like, how am I still functioning? Right? And how am I not a blithering mess crying my eyeballs out? Well, I do cry. I do have tattooed on eyeliner. So just so you know, if anybody that's listening to this ever meets me, it is tattooed on so I can cry and nobody knows. But how do I deal with my grief? I deal with my grief. And what's funny about it, and it's my way to explain it to you. So some days are really hard for me because every mission that I serve affects me. But I've been through a lot in my life. And so what do I mean by that? We all have wounds. We all have scars because our wounds turn into scars. So I believe that God can use our tests into testimonies, our messes into messages. So what do I mean by that? Like I was a single mom and I had to take my kids to, try and do this and do this. And so I connect with widows in a different way because my husband didn't pass, but I still knew what it was like to be a single mom and not be able to have a dad go to Father's Day is coming up, right? And not to have a dad to go to school with your kid for donuts for dads. So I had to overcome some of those same life situations, not because of the same reason or circumstance, but I still had to figure out how to help my kid, right? And that's what that widower is trying to do, whether it be Mother's Day, Father's Day kind of thing. So I do see a counselor. And the counselor that I see is a counselor that is also a counselor that sees first responders in our communities that have to go out on these terrible calls, these paramedics that have to go out on these unsavable drowning, vehicle accidents, things like that. Social workers that have to go in on these just crazy criminal things that all of your listeners and you and I both see on the news. So I go there and I go there to make sure that I stay in my right headspace so that I am in a good, healthy, emotional mindset to do what honoring our fallen does. So that casualty officer, that military member, that law enforcement representative that is going to use our support to support the family that they're currently assigned to serve knows that they have a solid organization with solid leadership that takes care of their mental and emotional capability, well-being. And I can tell you, Troy, that I have made a commitment, and my board of directors all knows it, for me as the founder and the executive director, CEO of this organization, that if I ever walk away from a mission and I don't feel emotionally hit by it, maybe some harder than others, but if I don't have an emotional connection to it, then it will be time for me to quit and wave the white flag. Because the minute that I become so desensitized that the death of these service members and these first responders doesn't affect me anymore, then I have no business doing my job.
Yeah. Yeah. Laura, like probably 3 or 4 years ago, I remember coming back to town and I was in Washington, D.C. Yeah. And but I see this huge, thing going on in a parking lot.
Chick-fil-A.
And I'm pulling over. I'm like, oh my God, isn't that Laura's organization? And I see you out there and you've got like an army of people. I mean, it was bigger than the city would put on back in the day for an event. And I was like, I was moved. I was like, wow, this is unbelievable. And I was so happy for you because I do follow a lot of the stuff that you were doing and I probably did leave off knowing that you were doing a lot of this with sweat equity and with no thought of how you would ever be reimbursed. And I remember now that we're talking about it, I remember thinking, wow, that is some dedication. And then to now there was trucks and things marked up. There was people were, in consistent dress and uniform that were part of your organization. I'm thinking, good for you. I think, when I see that, it shows me there is much more of an organization to this. And I'm just curious, from where you're at today, I know that you guys have a gala coming up, that something that is to try to help maintain and continue this mission. Maybe if you can, could you talk a little bit about that, and maybe a little bit more of the future, and for the listeners that want to get more involved, I'm going to post a lot of this on our show notes so they'll get more than they'll ever need to be able to learn more about your organization. But from the leader herself, could you tell me a little bit, like maybe talk about that?
Yeah, thank you. So I serving, and it kind of fits back with what your last, how do I deal with the grief? When I serve, I'm on my way. I'm in the middle of 7 active duty cases right now. People that are listening to this show don't know that. They're not on the news. They're not on the news probably because the family doesn't want it on the news. Their loved one was serving in the military and they died in a motorcycle accident, right? So, they're suffering a loss and we're supporting them. And so I'm on my way shortly after our talk here today to a funeral home to serve a family. When I'm done, and you'll understand, and your listeners will understand how this all, why the backstories, my husband hates backstories, but they're important a lot of times. And so what I mean by that is when I get done, and that's part of how do I deal with my grief. I deal with my grief by having our gala be different than a gala that they might be expecting that they're buying a ticket for.
Got it.
I could sit here all day and tell you what I do. I could sit here all day and show you text messages and emails that families send us and tell us what our service meant to them. But why not come to a gala, support a charity, and sit there in a room and hear firsthand the impact of what the service meant? And so the reason that I appreciate you even mentioning the gala is because there may be a listener, even if it's one, that is here locally in Southern California that happens to be in town on Saturday, September the 16th, 2023, and doesn't already have plans maybe to go to some, I heard there's a big country fest country music fest going on in Long Beach down by the Queen Mary. I'm like, great, my favorite music. And they planned it on the date of my gala. So Saturday, September the 16th, Old Ranch Country Club. And I encourage those that have been listening to this. And Troy, thank you again for having me.
Sure.
And those that have listened to this and says, wow, I kind of want to learn more. Well, buy a ticket, come to the gala.
Yeah.
And, and it's just hard for me because that's one of the ways I deal with my grief is I allow other people that are willing, that receive the support from the organization to tell our story. I don't need to grandstand. My reward is in heaven. It is not here on this earth. And so that fits right in with what does the future hold for honoring our fallen? I have no idea, but what I can wrap this whole thing up with, I can tell you that when you and I met and then Honoring Our Fallen started back on the 28th of January, 2011, I had no idea that we would be a national organization traveling around the world serving casualty missions for fallen service members and first responders. So what does the future hold? I don't know, but I'm along for the ride.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, again, what we'll do too is we'll make sure that we mention, we have our viewer base, our listening base is a lot on the East Coast also and in the Midwest. But I definitely will make sure that people can see where they can log on to help if they can't make it out here into California to do that.
Perfect.
And
they can actually go, if they go to Honoring Our Fallen, there is a little button to say to register as a volunteer. And then when they click on that button to register as a volunteer, there are breakdowns. So maybe they want to help us write a newsletter. Maybe they want to do this, but there's different options so that volunteers, I think that one of the disservices to volunteers, and from just in speaking with what you spoke with earlier in our interview, that you met with other nonprofits, several others in your show and so forth, is that volunteers want to help where volunteers are comfortable helping. So we wanted to make sure that our platform, when they go to register for a volunteer, that they could mark what they wanted to help with. Some people want to help with just boots on the ground work. Some want to help with this. And so we just want to make the opportunity available to everybody that would like to help so that everybody, maybe they don't have money, right? but they have time. So, we all have a purpose.
Yeah, well, Laura, I just want to thank you so much for coming down and being on the show and really exploring this topic. It's a tough one. It's an honorable one. And I'm just so grateful for everything you're doing. So good. Thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate being here, Troy, and I appreciate you helping. It's easier to talk to somebody that's been around since before the idea was even had. So I appreciate the honor and privilege to be here with you today and to reconnect and to get a little more depth in the background of what honoring our fallen has become. And thank you so much for your support.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks again for joining me today on the Ameritocracy Show. Be sure to follow me on social media and our website at troyedgar.com, where you can get more information and sign up for my weekly email. I hope you have a great week.